What is up, New Life Church? You guys have picked a great Sunday to be in God's house. It is Costume Sunday. I got to see a few adults who are also participating. I love that. Makes my heart very happy. Adults dressing up in costumes on a Sunday at church. In fact, I was going to be wearing a teenage Eugen Ninja Turtles outfit, as my 3-year-old son Jace says. I was going to be Michelangelo this morning, but all of the adults on staff, they convinced me that talking about the Bible while also wielding a pair of nunchucks was maybe not the best idea. But this is a good weekend to be in God's house, but next weekend I think it's going to be even better. I think it's going to be even better because our lead pastor, Ryan Goeden, he's going to be back in the house bringing the heat, and it is the first Sunday of the month, which means we've got Party with the Pastors. We do it every first Sunday of the month. Party with the Pastors is coming, and it is a party. Like, we've got snacks and games and music and giveaways. You can win a gift card to the Alamo Drafthouse movie theater. It is a huge party where you get to connect with the pastors and staff at the church. And if you haven't been there yet, there's going to be a card in your seat next to you, or the back of the seat in front of you. Grab that card, fill that out, drop it by the hello desk, and we'll get you at Party with the Pastors to connect with us. Now back to this weekend. Our text for today is Psalm 129. It is yet another Psalm of Ascents. And this morning, Psalm 129, we're going to find is this ancient Hebrew poem or song that is all about the faithfulness and persistence and preservation of our God. Psalm 129 puts on display God's faithfulness so that you and I are challenged and encouraged in terms of our own faithfulness. We're going to read all 8 verses of Psalm 129. This is what it says, starting in verse 1. Greatly have they afflicted me from my youth. Let Israel now say, greatly have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. The plowers plowed upon my back, and they made long their furrows. But the Lord is righteous. He has cut the cords of the wicked. May all who hate Zion be put to shame and turned backward. Let them be like the grass on the housetops, which withers before it grows up, with which the reaper does not fill his hand, nor the binder of sheaves his arms. Nor do those who pass by say, the blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord. Like we said, those verses, they show us the faithfulness of God. See it in verse 2. Our enemies might have afflicted us, but we haven't been overcome yet. They haven't prevailed against us yet. And I think what this psalm might be about is what our friend Eugene Peterson, who wrote a book all about the Psalms of Ascent. It's called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. We've been reading it together as a church throughout this series. And what Eugene Peterson says about this psalm is that it kind of puts on display the stick-to-itiveness of God. Eugene Peterson calls that the most inelegant word in the English language, but I kind of like it. The stick-to-itiveness of our God. In other words, the faithfulness or the loyalty or the persistence of our God. That's what we see here in these verses. And in his book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, our friend Eugene starts off with a somewhat humorous story of his own lack of stick-to-itiveness. How as a kid, he would go back and forth between hobbies and interests, new hobbies, old hobbies. He would just never stick with anything. And when I read that passage in his book, I thought, man, if that does not describe my childhood, it might sound familiar to some of us in the room. Growing up, I was that kid. I did not have persistence. I did not have stick-to-itiveness. That was not the kind of person that I was. I remember the first hobby that I was introduced to was video games. So my cousin, she donated her used Game Boy Color to myself, and her Game Boy Color came with a copy of Pokemon Blue version, and that changed 5-year-old Ryan's life, probably for the worse, because my elementary school years, I was a video game nerd. Still a little bit in high school and stuff too, but video games were the thing. And then when all of my friends started playing baseball, I wanted to play baseball. I think we got a picture of me on the baseball team on the screen. All my friends started playing baseball. We played youth baseball. And then I tried to play school baseball, which is a different kind of baseball. And I got cut from the team in 7th grade. And I decided baseball was probably not for me. Baseball was not the habits and hobbies and interests I had. They shifted once again. It was around this same time that I had picked up band. I was in the band in like 7th and 8th grade. And I played the baritone saxophone with my best friend, Jake Sokoviak. Thank God. Thank God that I am no longer in band. So in band, I quit just about as quick as I started, because the band had decided the year I was in band was also the year they weren't going to Disney. The band said, "Hey guys, we can't take students to Disney this." I don't know what bands do at Disney. I never got to go like march around at the park or play or something. But they said, "You're not going to get to go to Disney this year." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to get to be in band this year." And I quit. I quit band immediately, right then and right there. And at that point, I was getting ready to go into high school, and I decided that instead of band, instead of sports, instead of video games, I was just going to be a nerd. Like I was just going to be good at school. I wasn't good at sports, wasn't good at school, or I wasn't good at sports, and I wasn't good at band. So instead, I was going to be good at school. And because of that, I got really good at classes and grades and National Honors Society and scholarships. And then when I graduated and I didn't get valedictorian, I told myself it was because I had more friends than all the kids who had better grades than I did. And my interests shift once again. When I graduated, I decided, man, school didn't work, sports didn't work, band didn't work. I'm going to become an outdoorsman. And this one kind of stuck a little bit. Like I love to be in the out of doors, but this was also the same time frame when the Duck Dynasty craze was like sweeping the United States of America, and I was a wannabe member of the Duck Commander crew. We got a picture of me when I was in college, and also a picture of me when I worked here at New Life Church with my friend Ashley Garrett. And in both of those pictures, my beard was like way too long. And this season, the reason I put both pictures on the screen is because this season of my life, it lasted way too long. Like it shouldn't, from college to adult like career life, I wanted to be part of Duck Dynasty. And if they called me today, I would not say no. If they were like, "Hey, we need another member," I would not say no. We're bringing back the show. I would not say no. Even like when it comes to my job and my like calling, I remember a time in my life where I was pretty sure I was going to work at a church. I was pretty sure I was going to be a pastor. And because of that, I thought, man, I need to know everything. I need to know how to do everything a pastor does. Anything that happens in the church, I need to be able to do it. So I tried to learn how to play the guitar, and I tried to learn how to run slides and soundboards, and I tried to learn how to preach, and you can see which one of those stuck. And even to this day, just last week, I went to Big Shots, a fancy driving range on the north side of town, golfed for like 45 minutes, and I hit one good drive, and I came home and I told my wife, and I said, man, I think golf might be my thing. Like, I think this is for me. Like, I think that this is like my sport. And then just this last week, I fixed my car. Some of my buddies at the church helped me fix my car. Had a couple of coolant lines that needed to be replaced, and we got done, and I came home and I told my wife, and I said, I think, babe, I think I'm a car guy. I think I'm into cars now. And my habits and my hobbies and my interests and my passions, they change all the time. I don't have that stick-to-itiveness that we see in Psalm 129. And I don't think there's actually anything like all that harmful. Maybe it's not healthy, but I don't think there's anything all that harmful about maybe switching up habits and hobbies and interests. But I think that if y'all are anything like me, then we probably have a lack of stick-to-itiveness of a much more severe variety. We lack stick-to-itiveness, and we lack faithfulness, not just in our habits and our interests and our hobbies, but we lack stick-to-itiveness and faithfulness when it comes to following Jesus. We are not good at staying faithful in terms of knowing Jesus better. We're not good at it. That's something that is hard for sinful humans like you and I. We're not good at staying faithful when it comes to knowing Jesus better. And it just so happens that Bible scholars, they believe in Psalm 129, the psalmist, whoever wrote these verses, they probably left all of the affliction and oppression and enemies unnamed. They probably left it intentionally vague because most Bible scholars believe that the psalmist was trying to say that at any point in the history of God's people, whether it was the Egyptians enslaving God's people, the Philistines oppressing God's people, the Assyrians or the Babylonians exiling God's people. Even today, us trying to follow God, what the psalmist is saying is that throughout the entire history of God's people, throughout the entire story of Scripture, one thing remains, it's that it takes faithfulness to follow God, that it requires a little bit of faithfulness. Eugene Peterson, he characterizes the Psalms of Ascent as this sort of manual for following God faithfully. And in Bible scholars believe that these psalms and these songs would have been sung by God's people on the way to Jerusalem. They're on the way to spend time in God's presence. They're on their way to know Jesus better, if you will. And these psalms as a collection, they're sort of like a manual or a guide for what that process might look like. So what does it take if we want to know God even better than we know him right now? Well, according to Psalm 129, it's going to take faithfulness. It's going to take faithfulness. And the interesting thing about Psalm 129 is that it walks us through this history of God's people where he's delivered them. He hasn't let their enemies prevail over them. But what we notice about Psalm 129, what we notice about ourselves in this passage is that we're kind of the same. Like we're the same as God's people, that we struggle with faithfulness just like they did. God's people did not have a perfect track record of faithfulness in the same way that we don't have a perfect track record with faithfulness. So if it is not the faithfulness of God's people that is on display in this psalm, whose faithfulness it is about? Whose stick-to-itiveness is this psalm actually about? I think that this psalm, what it does is it puts on display for us the faithfulness of God. This psalm puts on display for us the stick-to-itiveness of God, that God sticks with his people, that God is constantly extending relationship to his people time after time after time in spite of their unfaithfulness. And that's what we see in this psalm. And it is that faithfulness, it is that stick-to-itiveness that drives and challenges and encourages us to have the same. I think that's what these verses are all about. And I know we've used a lot of different synonyms to describe what God is doing in these verses. We said that God is persistent, that God preserves his people, that God he is faithful to his people, that he's loyal, that he's tenacious for his people. That he does all these things, and there's not really one singular English word that gets at all of what God is doing in this passage. But in Hebrew, I think there is a helpful word that describes what God is doing here in these verses. In Hebrew, what we have is what's called hesed. It's a Hebrew word that means God's loving kindness and covenant faithfulness. It's one little Hebrew word, hesed, and it packs in all together these 4 or 5 English words, God's loving kindness and covenant faithfulness. And that's what we see on display in this psalm, the loving kindness of God, that he is ever faithful to his covenant promises that he has made to his people back then and to us today, ensuring that he's going to deliver them time after time after time, that he's going to show up and extend relationship to them time after time after time. And because he does, because of his faithfulness, it enables and it inspires our own faithfulness. In fact, I think that's what these verses from Psalm 129 are all about. It is God's faithfulness that enables and inspires our own faithfulness. God's faithfulness enables and inspires us to be faithful. So this morning we're going to take one more look at Psalm 129, and we're going to see all the different reasons that we have for remaining faithful. We'll do verses 1 through 3 that show us that we have good reason to remain faithful because of our past. And then verses 5 through 8, that shows we have good reason to remain faithful because of our future as well. And then finally, verse 4, we're going to save it to the end, best for last. I think it's the most important verse in the passage. It shows us that the ultimate reason for us to stay faithful is because of who our God is. It is God himself that is our ultimate reason for remaining faithful. We'll start again in verses 1 through 3, where we see that it is our past that gives us good reason to remain faithful. Greatly have they afflicted me from my youth. Let Israel now say, greatly have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. The plowers, they plowed upon my back, and they made long their furrows. These verses, they go back through the past of how God's people have been delivered and how God's enemies have not prevailed against his people. Time after time, that is the story of God's people. That is the history of the people of God. And when we look back on that past, what that should do is it should give us good reason to remain faithful. There's this interesting blend in those first couple verses of both individual and communal language. Right? The psalmist says, I have been afflicted. These enemies are oppressing me. But then there's a shift, right? It goes from individual language to language of the community. Let all of Israel say, let all of God's people say, we haven't yet been defeated. So there's this interesting blend of individual and communal language, and I think what the psalmist might be doing is I think he might be reminding himself that he's part of the larger family of God, that he belongs to a larger community, that this oppression or affliction that he is facing, it's not something he's facing by himself, but he's part of the family of God. And that's been true for the past. That means that the past for God's people is also true for him, that his story is now their story. And I love this invitation to faithfulness. Let all God's people say. It's almost like an invitation to put our faith in God himself. Let all God's people say. Let all of Israel say. So if we're in the room this morning and we're like, man, I don't know, Ryan, I don't think I'm like a faithful person. I don't think I can put my faithfulness in God. I can't put faith in God because I'm too sinful or I'm too far gone or God, man, God's not going to accept me or I'm not good enough. If that's the case, the best news of Psalm 129 is that it's not about our faithfulness at all. Like we said, it's about God and it is about his faithfulness alone. See his faithfulness again in verse 3 with this little bit of like agricultural imagery. The psalmist talks about his affliction in terms of a plow being dragged across his back by a team of oxen. Now, I'm not a farmer, and most of us in the room are not farmers, and most of us in the room are probably not familiar with like ancient Palestinian farming equipment. So I did a little research and I looked up a couple pictures. I'm not sure these are like accurate to the era, but this is kind of, the overall is definitely accurate to the era. But this is what a plow looks like. And we see that picture on your right. We see that all the time, right? Like oxen chained up to a plow. But we don't often see like what's going on beneath the ground. We don't often see like the plow itself. See that metal blade on the plow? The psalmist is saying, there's a giant team of oxen dragging a giant metal blade across my back. That's the affliction. That is the oppression that the psalmist is experiencing in these verses. Kind of gruesome, right? That's like a brutal image of what's happening to the psalmist. And it's at this point that I think it might be helpful for us to recognize there's a little bit of a disconnect between what the psalmist might be experiencing and what we oftentimes are experiencing. This is the psalmist putting into words his own oppression or affliction where people might actually come against him and threaten his life because of his faith. That probably has not happened for most of us in this room, right? What we often face is not so much affliction as it is inconvenience. Our friend Josh Moody, in his commentary on the Psalms of Ascent, he very helpfully distinguishes the two. He says that affliction, it is not the same thing as inconvenience. Whatever the psalmist is dealing with here, we don't know what it is, but it's obviously severe. It's obviously intense. It's brutal. It's gruesome. Whatever he's experienced, whatever problems he's facing, they're too much for him to handle. And oftentimes for us, we are deterred or we are distracted in our journey with Jesus by far less, right? What's the difference between affliction and inconvenience? So sometimes we might experience real, actual, like honest to goodness affliction. Maybe a family member is suffering from a terminal illness. Maybe we simply do not have the resource or the finance to make ends meet. We can't buy our groceries, can't meet our rent that month. Whatever it might be, maybe serious financial struggle. Or maybe there's like an element of like cultural persecution. We've probably never been in actual danger because of our faith, but sometimes there's like cultural persecution that takes place, where maybe we would get looked over for a promotion because we follow Jesus faithfully, and we're going to be right, and we're going to be good, and we're not going to do anything and everything to claw our way to the top. But we get looked over for a promotion. In that case, maybe that could count as like cultural persecution. Maybe that could count as like affliction. Maybe. But far more often, what we actually experience and what actually deters us and distracts us from knowing Jesus better, I think it would be classified as inconvenience. They didn't play the song that I liked at church this morning. Oh man, groups at 6:30 to 8. That's kind of a tough window for us. The kids go to bed at 7:30. Not sure that I'm going to be able to make it. Inconvenience, right? Or maybe we didn't get the promotion not because we follow Jesus faithfully, but maybe we didn't get the promotion because we're just not that good at our job. That's not affliction. That is inconvenience. That is inconvenience. And sometimes what we need is a healthy dose of reality. I think that's what this psalm provides for all of us. As uncomfortable as it is for us to hear, that maybe our problems aren't as big as we think they are. We do tend to do that though, right? We tend to over-dramatize and overcomplicate and overthink things. Oh, they've plowed furrows along my back. Well, maybe we put ourselves in that place. Maybe we put ourselves in that position. Maybe it was our own foolishness that got us there. Maybe it's an inconvenience that we're dealing with, not exactly affliction. But the best news in Psalm 129, is that God, He's there in the midst of the inconvenience, and He's there in the midst of the affliction. He's there in the midst of all of it. That's what Psalm 129 tells us, is that we can look to the past and we see that God was there in the middle of all of it. The inconvenience, the affliction, everything in between, God is there in the middle of it. And when we look to the past, it gives us good reason to remain faithful. We look to the past, it gives us those good reasons to remain faithful. So what does that mean for us? How do we remain faithful? I think that individual communal language thing, maybe that's important. Let all of God's people say. It's kind of what we do like every week here, 8, 9, 30, and 11. Let all God's people say. We're here to get to know Jesus better, right? Like maybe that's part of it. Maybe going to church is part of us being reminded of the fact that God, He does deliver His people. Maybe for us, we need to be familiar with those stories. Maybe we need to know like this is how God delivered His people in the past, and I'm one of God's people now today, so that means that's going to be true for me right here and right now. Like maybe we need to hold on to the story. That probably means we need to be familiar with like the story of Scripture, like how the Bible goes. I think that's part of the equation if we plan on remaining faithful. We have to look back at the past. We also have to look at the future. That's what we see in verses 5 through 8. Verses 5 through 8, we have to look at the future because the future gives us good reason to remain faithful. Verse 5, may all who hate Zion be put to shame and turn backward. Let them be like the grass on the housetops, which withers before it grows up, with which the reaper does not fill his hand, nor the binder of sheaves his arms, nor do those who pass by say, the blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord. Verses 5 through 8 are interesting, right? This is where the psalmist prays shame and withering and like the opposite of blessing, maybe even like cursing down on the heads of his enemies. And we get like, man, this is kind of aggressive. This is like, am I supposed to pray this way? We get all these questions, right? When we read verses like Psalm 129, 5 through 8. And I think that as maybe vindictive as these verses sound, I think the psalmist is on to something here. I think the psalmist might know what he is doing. Bible scholars, they call this an imprecatory psalm or an imprecatory prayer. And I know that's a big, like, nerdy Bible word, but all it means, our friend Josh Moody explains it, that all it means is we are praying in a way where we call on God to judge His enemies, where we call on God to act in line with His character, to act in line with His justice, to act in line with His righteousness. That's what an imprecatory psalm or an imprecatory prayer is. And I think that's the second half of these verses 5 through 8. The psalmist praying against his enemies. I think what he does here, I think he's on to something, because the psalmist, he doesn't just like suppress his emotions. He doesn't say, nope, I'm just going to fake it till I make it. He doesn't have a public meltdown. He doesn't crash out, as the teenagers say these days. He doesn't say, no, everything's fine, everything's good, everything is actually okay. He doesn't fake it. He doesn't pretend. He accepts the reality of what he's going through. He also doesn't take his complaints and his problems to his friends. And he doesn't even confront his enemies, right? Instead, what he does is he takes his greatest problems and his deepest pain to the one singular person who can actually help him and who can actually handle them. The psalmist takes his deepest problems and his greatest pain to the one person who takes our pain and takes our problems upon himself and deals with them once and for all. The psalmist takes all of those problems and all of that pain, he takes it to God. And that's really what an imprecatory psalm or an imprecatory prayer does. It's taking the stuff that we can't handle to the one person who can actually handle it. And there's something comforting about serving a God who is big enough to handle our deepest pain and our deepest problems. There's also something interesting about, and maybe encouraging about the fact that these imprecatory psalms, they show us that you and I, we have at the very least a shadow of God's own righteousness within ourselves. Because maybe it's not a bad thing that you and I get angry about the stuff that makes God angry. When unrighteousness and when injustice make us angry, I don't think that's a bad thing. That's in line with the character of God. And the right way to deal with it is to bring those things then to God. Eugene Peterson, he's got a helpful quote about this idea. he says that we're not going to figure out a better way to deal with the wicked by just suppressing what we're feeling. We're not going to find a better way to deal with the wicked by excusing their behavior as neurosis, blaming it on the fact that they didn't know better or there might be something wrong with them. No, that's not the way to deal with the wicked. We're going to find a better way to deal with the wicked when we take our anger and we offer it up to God. And what God does is he teaches us this new way of creative love. That's what God does. That's what an imprecatory prayer or psalm does, is it puts the future into God's hands. I think that's why the psalmist walks through what the future looks like in these verses. That's the content of verses 5 through 8. What does the future look like for those who hate God? What does the future look like for those who hate God and his city and his people in the presence of God that dwells there? Well, the future, it looks like shame. It looks like withering. The psalmist throws in a little bit more of that agricultural imagery here. And the idea of withering, it's withering grass on a rooftop, it's probably foreign to us, because if we have grass on our roof, it's probably time to call the roofer. That would be a problem, right? That's not normal for us. But in ancient Palestine, grass growing on a roof, at least for a short period of time, it was normal. They had what was known as thatch roofing, and I think we got a picture. Yeah, it would look something like this. Again, this isn't like era-specific and accurate, but it would be like straw and sticks and twigs layered on the roof. And then what they'd do is they'd come in with a layer of mud on top of that, and it would create like a semi-waterproof layer. Thatch roofing, okay? And if there was any kind of seed within the mud, then sometimes that seed would sprout, but it would very quickly wither because of the severe climate in ancient Palestine. And the psalmist says that that grass that would sprout and then immediately wither, that's what the future of the wicked looks like. The future of the wicked is futile. The future of the wicked, the future for people who hate God, it is characterized by futility, by worthlessness, by meaninglessness. And then finally, the psalmist, he says that the future for people who hate God, it's characterized by whatever the opposite of blessing is. The psalmist says that these people who hate God, they're going to be so unblessed that no one would ever make the mistake of calling them blessed. No one would ever make the mistake of saying, hey, have a blessed day, because they are so obviously unblessed. And if that's what the future looks like for people who hate God and hate his house and hate his people, then we have to ask the question, what does the future look like for people who love God and love his house and love his people? What does the future look like for us, you and I, people who've put their faith in Jesus? I think it looks like the opposite. It doesn't look like shame, it looks like honor for people who love God. It doesn't look like withering, it looks like bounty. It doesn't look like cursing or the opposite of blessing. No, it looks like blessing to the highest degree. Honor and bounty and blessing. That's what the future holds for people who have put their trust in God as their Savior. Man, if anything, that is a future that is worth staying faithful for. If that's really what the future looks like, according to Psalm 129, if that is really what the future looks like, then we have good reason to remain faithful. In his book, Eugene Peterson, he compares this faithfulness to how like a perennial flower will sprout and bloom year after year after year. And this withering is like the opposite, like an annual, something that, I'm not a gardener, okay? I had to look all these terms up. But it's like an annual where you have to plant it year after year after year. And at my house, we have these, I think they're called Amaryllis belladonnas. We've got these flowers that grow at our house. I'm not using the Latin name to sound like I'm smart because I had to look it up. I'm using the Latin name because the English name for these flowers is naked lady flowers. And I wasn't going to put a picture of that on the screen. So these flowers, they are a perennial. It means they got like a little, what's the little thing? A bud? Not a bud. A bulb. Thank you. Man, see, I'm not a gardener. Told you. They got a bulb that sits in the ground, and year after year, that annoying little bulb sprouts flowers in my yard. And I don't know who lived in the house before me. I don't know why they put them there. I think it was a prank on me. But like, I've tried to get rid of these things. Tried to dig them up, tried the pesticides, tried the weed eater, tried the mower. Nothing works. I can't kill them. It's like Bermuda grass. It's like those wild onions. Some of y'all are familiar with this if you're not good at taking care of your yard, like I'm not good at taking care of your yard. And I can't get rid of them. And I know that we often think of, like stuff that we can't get rid of in our yard is kind of annoying. But that's sort of what the psalmist is saying it's going to be like for the future of God's people. The future of God's people, and it's one where they stick around. It's one where they are faithful. It's one where God's so faithful to them that they're able to remain faithful to him, where they are perennial, where year after year after year they bloom time and again, and there's nothing that can stop them from coming back. And that's not because of their faithfulness, but it's because of the faithfulness of God on their behalf. So how do we remind ourselves of the future? Maybe we put this whole like imprecatory prayer thing into practice. So if we're like, okay, I'm making a mental list of all the people in the margin of my Bible that I'm going to write down and pray shame against. That's not how imprecatory prayer works. I think the way imprecatory prayer and imprecatory psalms work is we take whatever's hurting us, and we take whatever's angering us. Like Eugene Peterson says, we bring it to God. We offer it up to him. That's what the psalmist does in these verses. For me, I have this rule in my prayer journal where if something is stressing me out, if something is causing me a lack of peace, I put it into my prayer journal. I write about it, journal about it, pray about it, whatever. It goes into the prayer journal. And I think I might need to expand that rule just a little bit. I think I might need to expand that rule to say that if something is angering me, or if something is hurting me, or if something has wounded my heart, then maybe what I need to do is I need to put it in that prayer journal. Maybe I need to take it to God, bring it to God, to the one person who can actually handle it and can actually help me with it. And when I bring those problems and that pain to God, what I'm reminded of is I'm reminded of the future, reminded of God's justice and God's righteousness and the fact that God, he's going to take care of the future. Reminded of the future, and when I look at the future and when I look at how good the future really is, man, I've got good reason to persevere. I've got good reason to remain faithful. Now, last but not least, we finally made it. Verse 4. Verse 4, it's my favorite verse in the passage. It says, the Lord is righteous. He has cut the cords of the wicked. The Lord is righteous, for he has cut the cords of the wicked. There's two parts to verse 4. There's a little bit of information about who God is and a little bit of information about what God does. Who is God? God is righteous. And we think of righteousness in terms of holiness, in terms of goodness or rightness. God always does the right thing, and those are all true. But in ancient Israel, righteousness was also thought of in terms of relationship. The idea here is that God is constantly extending right relationship to his people. Time after time after time, God extends the ability to relate rightly to him to his sinful, wrong, broken people, just like you and me. So that's God's righteousness. And then because God is righteous, what has God done? He has cut the cords of the wicked. This comes right after verses 1 through 3, right after the plowing imagery, the oxen imagery, right? And most Bible scholars think that the psalmist is saying the cords of the wicked, what is tying together the plow with the oxen, God's cut them. God has cut them. God has provided freedom. God has put a stop to the oppression and the affliction that we might be facing. God has cut the cords of the wicked. He's provided freedom for us, his people, because he is faithful to us. And this week, I didn't come up with this story, and I didn't find this story, but one of my friends shared it with me, and it's almost like too perfect not to share. And it might have a little bit, there might be some elements of like, it might be a little bit legendary, might be not entirely authentic, but my friend shared with me this story about Abraham Lincoln, and about how Abraham Lincoln, this is a pre-Emancipation Proclamation, how Abraham Lincoln, he freed this woman who was enslaved. And when he granted her freedom, he said, you are now free, you can go wherever you want to go. You can do whatever you want to do. And she had been a slave since birth, and she thought, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. So she looks at Abraham Lincoln and she says, I can go wherever I want to go. And he said, yeah, you can go wherever you want to go. That's what it means to be free. And this is the part that I'm not sure is 100% authentic, but I'm using it even though it might not be true because it's too good not to. She looked at Abraham Lincoln and she said, if I can go anywhere I want to go, then I'm going to go with you. You are the person who has freed me. You have proven your faithfulness to me, and now I'm going to be faithful to you. You have shown me your character, and now I want to be a person who has that same kind of character. In the same way, I think that it's God's character that drives our own. What we see in verse 4 is that it's God himself who's the ultimate reason that we remain faithful. If it wasn't for God's faithfulness on our behalf, you and I would not even have the ability to be faithful. God's faithfulness enables our own, but it also inspires our own. It's the example for our own. When we see God's faithfulness on display, it should make us want to be faithful in the same way He's been faithful to us. There's a little bit of like a sense of obligation here, right? When we see how much God has done for us, it should make us want to do the same for God. And when we see God's faithfulness, it should prompt us to be faithful in response. I think that is the right response. We see God's character, and we should want God's character. We should want to be more like Him, more faithful because of His faithfulness to us. I know that we've gone through all these different reasons for why we should remain faithful. The past obviously gives us reason to be faithful. The future obviously gives us reason to remain faithful. God Himself, His character, His righteousness, obviously a reason to remain faithful. But I think we still yet have not hit the most important reason, the best reason for us to remain faithful. The words of Psalm 129, they are strikingly similar to another passage of Old Testament poetry. Another passage of Old Testament poetry. And what I think both of these passages do is they actually point us forward to the one place where we see the faithfulness of God on display better than anywhere else. They point us forward to the cross, to the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And when we look at these verses, I think you'll be able to see what I mean. Isaiah chapter 53. These are verses about Jesus. They sound very similar to Psalm 129. Isaiah 53 verse 2, for He grew up before Him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at Him, no beauty that we should desire Him. The life of Jesus was nothing impressive. He was a carpenter's son. Didn't look like He was going to be anything special. Looked like withering by all accounts. Verse 5, but He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon Him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with His wounds we are healed. Some translations, they say it's by His stripes we are healed. It's almost as if Jesus could be speaking the words of Psalm 129 Himself. They've plowed furrows into my back. Not actual literal furrows, but stripes cut into Jesus' back at the hands of the Romans. Finally, verse 11, out of the anguish of His soul He shall see and be satisfied. By His knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. It's the righteousness of God, that extension of right relationship by God Himself that makes us righteous, that makes us able to relate to God rightly. It's God's own faithfulness that makes us able to be faithful to Him. And we see that the very best through the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And I know that we started with a sort of lighthearted discussion about how my habits and hobbies and interests and passions shift and change left and right. But if we can come full circle for just a moment, for me in my life, the one thing that has remained consistent is relating to Jesus. And this is not a testament to my own faithfulness, not a testament to my persistence, not a testament to my loyalty. It's a testament to God's. It is the fact that God has proven Himself faithful to me time and time again. And it is because of His faithfulness that I find myself so challenged and so encouraged to remain faithful to Him in response. So the very best news for us this morning from Psalm 129 is that if we are on the verge of giving up, God is not. The very best news for us from Psalm 129 is that eternally, forever, and always, God has declared that He is not giving up on you and He's not giving up on me. That He is faithful till the very end, that He is faithful on our behalf. And now He calls us to be faithful on His. So Jesus, this morning, we're thankful for Your faithfulness that we see in these verses. And God, we recognize that we're not good at faithfulness. We recognize that we're not good at having that stick-to-itiveness, that persistence, that loyalty, and that tenacity that You possess. But God, we also know that You can help us become more like You. Lord, our prayer is simple this morning. That's what we want. We want our lives to look more like Your life, Lord. We want, Jesus, the character that You demonstrate to be our character. God, we're asking for your help to be more faithful, to remain faithful because we have good reason to do so from the past, good reason to do so from the future, good reason to do so because of your character, God. God, as we've seen all of these good reasons to remain faithful, it's our prayer, Lord, that you'd help us to do it. And God, we believe that you will because you've asked. Lord, it's in your name. And everybody said, amen.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us online today. We hope that this service was everything that you needed it to be. And if you would like to find out more about what's going on at New Life Church, check us out online at nlspringfield.com. From there, you can find out more about our staff. You can see upcoming events. And if you would like to give to New Life Church, you can go to giving.nlspringfield.com. Have a great week, everybody.